My brother didn't just steal my birthright, he made me sign it away for my son's medical care. The bill was $50 million. My revenge would cost him everything. The boardroom air on the 40th floor was thick with the scent of betrayal, expensive coffee, and polished mahogany. I watched, my hand trembling not from fear but from the cold, medical four-port still taped to the back of it, as my only sibling, Silas, cast the deciding vote to remove me as CEO of our family's company, Vance Agro. The medical leave of absence I'd taken for my young son's leukemia treatments had been my one moment of necessary vulnerability. Silas, with the calm of a practiced surgeon, had turned it into the weapon he'd been forging for years. "Our thoughts are with Adrian and his family," he'd said, his voice slick with a concern that didn't reach his eyes. "But Vance Agro needs unwavering, full-time leadership. In this critical phase, we must prioritize the stability of the company our grandfather built." The board, a body he had meticulously stacked with allies and indebted sycophants over the past year, murmured its assent. My fate was sealed not by failure, but by my love for my child. "My name is Adrian Vance." The severance package they presented was a gilded coffin, lined with velvet to hide the nails. A single payment of $5 million. It was a laughable, insulting fraction of the $50 million in founders' shares I was legally forced to sell back to the company at a fair market value. A value Silas had spent months artificially depressing through strategic leaks and fabricated regulatory fears. But the clause attached was the masterstroke, the true lever of his coercion. I could refuse the package and fight for my shares, but if I did, the company's executive health plan, now under his direct control, would legally contest and deny every single one of my son's ongoing, experimental treatments as non-essential and investigational. The math was hideously simple. My pride and my rightful $50 million versus my son's chance at life. With my wife's tears drying on my shirt and the ghost of my son's smile in my mind, I signed. I accepted the $25 million net loss. I watched from the shadows as Silas, my brother, became the uncontested majority shareholder of the empire our grandfather had built from a single acre of dirt and determination. For a year, I became a ghost at the family table. While my son battled through rounds of chemo that ravaged his small body, I sat in sterile hospital rooms, holding his hand and watching the business news on mute. The financial channels celebrated Silas's bold new vision for Vance Agro. He sold off our legacy sustainable farms in the heartland to a petrochemical giant, Petrodyne, calling it portfolio optimization. He laid off employees whose families had worked with us for 3 generations, labeling it efficiency streamlining. The $50 million that was to be my family's security, my son's future, had been had by my brother's greed and was now being spent on a different kind of survival, on specialist lawyers to fight the insurance company and on treatments not yet approved but full of fragile hope. The company's name, once synonymous with integrity, became a shortcut for ruthless corporate avarice. My phone, once buzzing with board updates, was silent save for calls from doctors and medical billing advocates. The fury within me was a cold, dormant star, compressed under the immense weight of a more immediate love. The day my son's scans showed no detectable cancer cells, the day he was declared in remission, was the day my long winter ended and my war began. The all-consuming fear that had clouded my mind evaporated, leaving a landscape of cold, clear focus. I still had resources. Not Vance Agro money, but my own, the remnants of the severance, savvy personal investments, and a network of loyalists Silas had foolishly alienated. And I possessed a secret he had long forgotten in his ascent, our grandfather's most fundamental lesson. The old man didn't just teach us about soil and seasons, he taught us about pressure and leverage. In this very boardroom, now Silas's throne room, he'd once told us, "Adrian, Silas, to break a man's hold on something, you don't just pull at his arms. That's a contest of strength you might lose. You find the one thing he's leaning his whole weight on, the hidden prop, and you kick it out from under him. Then, he falls by his own momentum." I hired a forensic consultancy firm, quieter and more discreet than any big-name outfit, but just as ruthless. Their mandate was singular: find what Silas Vance was leaning on. Not his public persona, but his private obsession. It took 3 months and a significant portion of my remaining capital. The answer, when it came, wasn't in Vance Agro's sanitized public books. It was in Silas's personal, off-book venture, a secretive, staggeringly ambitious vertical farm project in the Nevada desert, codenamed Oasis 1. He had quietly leveraged his new mountain of Vance Agro stock to secure over $200 million in private financing from a consortium of European banks, betting his entire personal fortune and reputation that this would be his legacy project, the achievement that would finally dwarf our family name and be his alone. The technical blueprints and proprietary climate modeling software were a near-carbon copy of the next-generation agricultural designs I had personally developed and shelved just before my forced leave. The theft was breathtaking in its audacity. He hadn't just stolen my company. He had pillaged my mind, my years of research, and was presenting it as his own genius. But in his arrogant rush to break ground, he'd made a single, fatal miscalculation. To secure the perfect tract of Nevada land at a discount, he'd exploited a controversial zoning loophole, classifying Oasis 1 under an old agricultural statute that bypassed modern environmental review. The loophole had one weakness: it was voidable if a legally recognized, affected party filed a formal contestment, triggering an automatic, mandatory freeze. I was an affected party. The core technology was demonstrably mine. Standing in my home office late at night, the file glowing on my screen, I could hear my son breathing softly in his room down the hall, alive, healthy, sleeping. Silas had pushed me out for being distracted by family. Now, that family was my impregnable fortress, and his stolen dream of legacy was the fragile wall I was about to bring down. My brother thought he left me with nothing but a hospital bill and a broken name, but in his greed, he constructed the perfect weapon and handed me the blueprint to its destruction. To break a man who has everything, you don't attack his palace. You poison the well his palace is built upon. My brother Silas was emotionally bulletproof, but he was financially vulnerable in one precise place: his obsession with a legacy separate from our name. Vance Agro was our shared, complicated past. Oasis 1, his secret $200 million desert fortress, was the pure future he wanted to claim as his own genius. He'd used his stolen control of the company as collateral, betting his entire new fortune that no one could see, or would dare touch, this personal project. His mistake was building it with stolen bricks from my workshop. The zoning loophole he'd exploited was my surgical entry point. The Nevada County Land Classification for Oasis 1 was a technical gray area. Mixed-use conservation. This required a full environmental and social impact review, a 6-month process Silas's lawyers had deftly bypassed with a combination of political pressure and opaque filings. I became the spanner in the works. Through a newly formed, anonymous LLC named Heritage Growth Partners, my legal team filed a formal, densely cited objection with the Clark County Planning Board. We didn't scream theft. We calmly argued potential catastrophic groundwater depletion and reliance on unverified, proprietary technology posing a material public risk. The technology, of course, was my stolen design. The filing triggered an automatic 120-day review freeze. The clock stopped on his desert palace. His call came 3 hours later, the first time he'd spoken to me in a year. "Adrian, what is this pathetic, transparent stunt?" His voice was a low, controlled burn. "Withdraw it. Today. It's not a stunt, Silas. It's civic duty. I'm concerned about the community's resources," I replied, my tone flat. I was in my home office, watching a live drone feed I'd paid for, where million-dollar earth movers sat silent under the desert sun. "Don't insult me. You're bitter and you're lashing out. It's beneath you. My legal team will have this frivolous claim dismissed by the end of the week. I'm sure they'll try," I said, pausing for effect. "But will your financiers wait a week?" This was the pressure point. The $200 million loan from the European consortium had a strict, regulatory delay clause. Any government-imposed stall exceeding 90 days allowed them to demand immediate repayment of up to 30% or call in the collateral, his Vance Agro shares. The silence on the line was profound. He'd assumed I was broke and broken, not that I'd dissected his financial architecture. "You're spending the last of your son's security on a fight you can't win," he finally spat, the veneer cracking to reveal raw contempt. "My son's future is my only concern, brother. Which is why I'm looking at the future of our family's name. The one you're currently auctioning off to the highest bidder." I ended the call. The legal chess match began. His high-priced attorneys moved to dismiss our objection, arguing Heritage Growth Partners had no standing. This was the moment my secret weapon fired. We didn't just claim the tech was risky, we demonstrated it was stolen. My forensic team had obtained the digital fingerprint. A junior engineer on Silas's personal staff had accessed my encrypted, private development server during my medical leave, downloading terabytes of files, including the Oasis 1 prototype. We had the metadata, the server logs, the encrypted tunnel exit point, a complete, unassailable chain of evidence. We didn't file it with the court. We packaged it into an anonymous, forensically terrifying dossier and delivered it directly to the lead risk officer at the primary European bank backing the $200 million loan. The reaction was instant and seismic. Banks are not moral entities. They are risk avoidance machines. A project whose core technology was demonstrably stolen intellectual property represented a bottomless liability. Their own covenants gave them an escape hatch. They didn't call the loan, they initiated a deep dive project audit, freezing all further capital disbursements. For Silas, an audit was a death by 1,000 cuts, a public, scrutinizing limbo far worse than a noisy lawsuit. I let him marinate in that panic for 2 weeks. I spent the time relearning joy with my son, his laughter in our backyard a potent antidote to the bitterness of my crusade. Then, I summoned Silas. Not to my home or his office, but to our grandfather's original, crumbling seed warehouse on the derelict edge of the old family property. He arrived in a silent electric car, his tailored suit a grotesque parody against the rotting wood and dust. "Come to revel in the decay, Adrian? Or just to gloat in a place no one can see you? I've come to make you an offer," I said, my voice echoing in the cavernous, sunlit space. "Withdraw your motion to dismiss my zoning objection. Issue a press release announcing a voluntary 6-month sustainability review for Oasis 1. And reverse the sale of the Henderson family farm to Petrodyne." He barked a laugh, the sound hollow in the emptiness. "In exchange for your withdrawal? That's not a deal. That's my unconditional surrender. Why would I ever do that? Because the alternative is me filing a criminal complaint for grand theft and intellectual property fraud with the Nevada Attorney General at 9 a.m. tomorrow. The dossier the banks have is redacted. Mine is not. It names you, your engineer, and details the conspiracy. You might survive a bank audit. You will not survive criminal indictment. Your board will vote you out before the handcuffs are even cold." The color drained from his face, leaving a waxy pallor. This had moved beyond business. This was now about prison. This stopped being about the $50 million you stole from me the moment you stole my work, Silas. This is about the legacy you're trying to build on a foundation of theft. I will burn every blueprint and testify in every court before I let you put your name on my life's work. He stared at me, his mind racing behind his eyes, calculating angles and finding none. The leverage was absolute. I had him cornered not with a superior army, but by proving the ground he stood on was mine. I had forced my brother to choose between saving his stolen empire and facing prison, but the final, most devastating weapon was still hidden in the decaying silence of our grandfather's warehouse. When you fight a monster, they say you must be careful not to become one. But what if the only weapon that can kill it is the one you swore never to use? Silas stared at me in the dust of our grandfather's warehouse, his arrogance finally shattered, replaced by the raw calculation of a cornered animal. He knew I held the key to a prison cell. "What's in the warehouse, Adrian?" he asked, his voice stripped of its power, reduced to a wary hush. What you've been looking for your whole life, I said, walking toward a rusted, padlocked metal cabinet bolted to the far wall. It was where our grandfather kept the unvarnished truth of his business, not the board minutes, but the ledgers of character. I used a key from my keyring, one I'd carried since I was 18. The lock gave with a shriek of protest. Inside were not financial documents, but journals. Dozens of them. And a single, thick manila envelope. I pulled out the envelope and handed it to him. Grandfather's final will. The real one. Not the version you and your lawyers probated. Silas's hands trembled as he pulled out the document. It left the bulk of the company, 51% of the voting shares, in a trust for the first grandchild to embody the company's founding principles. Integrity to the land, loyalty to its people, and innovation for stewardship, not just profit. The trust was to be administered by a third-party executor until that grandchild turned 35 or could demonstrate that embodiment. I was 36. The document named the executor, the family priest, Father Michael, who had passed away 2 years ago. Silas had probated a simpler, later will that left the company to be split evenly between us. A will I now saw was a fraudulent copy, created after grandfather's stroke. This is worthless, Silas stammered, but the terror in his eyes betrayed him. It's not filed. It's superseded. Father Michael is dead. You can't prove it's real. The journal can, I said softly, taking my grandfather's final leather-bound book from the cabinet. I opened it to a marked page and read aloud, my voice steady in the hollow space. I have seen Silas's heart. He confuses ambition for vision, and cost for value. He would sell the soil itself if it showed a quarterly profit. I cannot leave Vance Agro to be dismantled. Adrian understands the roots. The company must go to him, but I must protect it from Silas's wrath until Adrian is ready. Father Michael will know when. I looked at my brother. Father Michael kept a copy of the will and a sealed letter detailing his role with his order's legal counsel. I found it last week. The documentation is impeccable. I have it all. The fraudulent will you used gives you no legal standing. You are not the majority shareholder, Silas. You never were. The revelation was a silent detonation. The $200 million loan was collateralized by shares he did not rightfully own. The bank audit would now uncover not just stolen IP, but securities fraud. This was no longer about a zoning dispute or a civil lawsuit. This was about a decade of criminal conspiracy. What do you want? The question was a ghost of a sound. Everything, I said. You will sign your shares, the ones you thought you had, back to the rightful company trust. You will publicly resign from Vance Agro for personal reasons. You will personally repay the $5 million severance you gave me as a signing bonus, with interest. And you will walk away from Oasis One entirely. The banks will take the project, and I will buy the core technology back from them for pennies. In return, I do not file the criminal complaint. I do not expose the fraudulent will to the authorities. You avoid prison. You get to keep whatever personal money you haven't sunk into that desert mirage. You'd leave me with nothing? He whispered, hollowed out. I'm leaving you with your freedom. I corrected him coldly. Which is more than you were going to leave me when you conspired to let my son's insurance be cancelled. You tried to take my son's future. I'm only taking your company. The paperwork was signed within the week. His resignation was a masterpiece of bland corporate prose. The transfers were executed by stunned lawyers. I stood once more in the CEO's office, the skyline stretching before me. The $50 million in shares were restored. The company was mine. The revenge was complete, perfectly calibrated, and utterly cold. Weeks later, I visited my son's school for a father's lunch. As I watched him laugh with his friends, the crushing weight of the last few years finally lifted. But in its place settled a quieter, more permanent weight. I had saved our legacy. I had protected my family. I had won. But as I drove back to the office my brother had built for himself, a single, unresolved question echoed in the silence of the car, a question I now turn over to you. I won. I got every penny and every shred of power back. So why does my victory feel like a eulogy for the brother I once shared a sandbox with? Was saving my legacy worth destroying my last living family to do it?